Hello, everyone. Hello. It's so incredibly beautiful to be here. I feel like I'm being filled up with so much water, so I'm going to try to keep my tears in, or maybe just allow them to come out. As I'm standing here, one of the women that I want to name is Geddes, who is the former executive director of Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, the organization that I currently have the privilege of serving with. She was supposed to be here with me today, but if any of you have a personal relationship with Fania, have ever met her, she is graciously humble. And so she sent an email to Reverend Dr. Paula and said, hey, by the way, I'm not going to be coming anymore. And I was like, are you sure? She was like, yeah, I think you got it. This is quite normal. Every time I'm asked to speak or lead a workshop, I try to really shy away from it. But, you know, as one of my mentors, David Anderson Hooker said to me that just because I'm being led doesn't mean I can't do things on purpose. And so the path of coming here, despite the fact that one of the women who I admire so much and has given me such a platform isn't here, is my way of doing things on purpose. And so a part of that is trying to speak slow. I'm Jamaican and grew up in New York, and so I tend to speak fast. If it's going too fast, because I want to be with you, if it's going too fast, you can just put your hand up and let me know. I'm also going to try my hardest to follow my notes, but it's okay if I don't. And so my name is Jodie Geddes. I go by Jodie Geddes. I was born in Jamaica, West Indies, and came to the United States when I was about 6 years old. And immediately there was this way that I could see the dichotomy that existed between folks who looked like me, black folks, and folks who did, and white folks, and including brown folks as well in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, New York. And I had this sense of what America would be like and was incredibly disappointed. At this moment, my faith began to really shake, and I really asked God why we were here, why were we in this country. And there was a sense of shame that came along with that because my mother had worked so hard to get me to the U.S., but also made the decision to bring me one of 5 children to the United States. And so I was the only one that grew up in the U.S. And while that is a privilege, in that moment, as a 6-year-old, I did not believe so. I saw poverty, and I saw suffering. Even if my mother didn't admit it, even if her faith was never shaken, even as I shook and questioned God, she just told me to continue to pray, right? And it still strikes me today when I think about the strength and the power of my mother and my great-grandmother and the ways in which they have continued to just persevere by the grace of faith. And so one of the things that you all did was to put on the staff the ancestors. You tied a piece of string and named the ancestors. On each of your table, there is a card with an image on it. Some of you have the dancer and the warrior, and I really want to pay respect to our sister, Zenju Earthling Manuel, that created this deck of cards called Black Angel. See, some of you are looking around right now. It's okay if you don't have a card, we'll get to you. The tables that do have a card, can you just hold it up? There are 5 different cards. Thank you all so much. And some have a waking path, and some have a sleeping path. And it's about finding a balance between these 2 things. This kind of light and darkness, right? And it's about owning that. And so as we think about those whose shoulders we stand on, I also want you to think about who will be standing on your shoulders. Someone is allowed for you to be here today, whether you know it or not. Right? And we, in often Native and Indigenous tradition, we're talking about, to these lands, we're talking about folks from 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. And so I'm going to invite you in this moment, if you feel led and comfortable, to close your eyes. And I want you to inhale deeply. And feel the breath surrounding you like a ring of light. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. And as you continue to breathe, I want you to think about who will be standing on your shoulders. would you want to pass on to them? What has been given to you? What do you need to go back and catch? Inhale. Exhale. And whenever you feel ready, I invite you to open your eyes and on a piece of paper that's on the table, construction paper, to write the name of that person down. And this will kind of serve as a centerpiece for your table. So write the name of that person down, or people, or things, or places, anything that came to you. And if your table doesn't have enough paper, just lean over to the next one and say, can I have a sheet of construction paper, please? So the next thing I'm going to invite you to do is go around your table and share the name of the person who will be standing on your shoulders. And so I'm asking you to trust those at your table with your stories and also the name of that person you wrote down on the paper. This is an invitation and not an obligation. And so if you feel like you don't want to speak, that is also okay. So right now I'm inviting you to say the name of that person to those at your table. Go around in a circle and lay it at the center. And I'll give you a few moments to do that.
Yeah, I work there every day. You are. That's real cool. Yeah. You consider this was the last hospital in Dallas integrated in 1968. First, the last place we had was residents, black residents. It's got a history.
Yeah, she did. When she said that, I was like,
And so I'm going to invite you to close your eyes and also invite you to continue the conversation beyond that and in your communities. Ashe, Ashe. Thank you all so much for sharing and trusting each other. Is this? Yeah. Perfect, thank you. So I thank you all for sharing and trusting each other and writing those names down. Before I begin, I would like to call in my ancestors, the Maroons, the Awaks, and the Tainos, to guide my words today and allow me to be still, to call in those who were enslaved on these lands so that they may do the same, and to also call in 2 of the many tribes that exist in Virginia, the Monacan Nation and the Nottoway, to continue to guide me. In the nature of who I am, as well as restorative justice, we see it fit to ask for permission to begin. And so I ask these ancestors and these descendants for permission for me to begin and to move forward, and that if I go off my notes, I can let go and say what needs to be said. And with that, when I think about those who will be standing on my shoulders, I think about the young people that I served at Juvenile Hall. I left Juvenile Hall in Oakland, California on Tuesday before coming here on Wednesday morning, and continue to think about what I was leaving behind and who I was leaving behind, and what a privilege it is to be in space with young people that the world doesn't see as people. Many people, even people in the work, don't see them that way, right? And what they're giving me, what they're pouring into me, and I must take that and pour it into my community, right? And so to wait for me continue to do the work that I'm doing, but to also take care of myself so I can show them what it means to take care of themselves. And I usually don't do a great job at that, but at least there was a reminder of what is possible in the way of taking care of myself. Many of you are probably wondering what the work is that I do. I work for a restorative justice organization called Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth in Oakland, California. Has anyone heard of restorative justice? Just raise your hand. Oh, my heart. Wow, that's amazing. Thank you. On many levels, what you may have heard could be true, but also a limiting misconception about the way that restorative justice works within our society. When folks often hear about restorative justice, they think about it when it has to do with harm, which is a very white Eurocentric way of thinking, that the only time we come together as community is when somebody does something bad, right? And something happens, right? But it's also really thinking about how are we continuously in relationship with each other. So we recognize conflict as normal. So when it happens, we lean into it with healthy ways, right? So the issue isn't that conflict happens. It's about the ways that we deal with and engage with conflict when it does, right? And so you see this probably in your friendships and relationships at different moments. I know I have, right? Someone says something and does something that was out of pocket, and then they're disposable. We cut them off. Right? But there was clearly some work to do in our relationship if it was that easy to let go of them, right? And so this kind of conflict as healthy allows us to then not just look at the person who we feel like harmed us, but to also begin to look at ourselves to say, what can we do better? What can we do different? The collective we, not what can that person do better, right? But what can we, because we're constantly in relationship and in community with each other. And so I think on one level this was like deep in my being, but through my different experiences in the world, that went away. And I had to go back to that, right? When you are a Black Caribbean American woman living in this world and you have an accent and people tell you you're different from people that look like you, and suddenly the accent goes out the window, you become another Black girl from the hood. And that's exactly who I became, but didn't have an understanding of that because I came from a family. My mother is older than the independence of our nation. And so she's seen some things, and she's heard some things, and she's experienced some things, and we never talk about those things, right? And so as the only one kind of growing up between these identities, no one knew what it meant to have this conversation with me when I was mad as hell at some white people, and some white people, right? But also just everything in the world that couldn't recognize all the beauty I was seeing around me. The way that one word that's developed in the hood travels all across the nation, one dance travels all across the nation, scholars that come from so many places, the first university, stoplight, toilet paper, blow dryer, every single thing that we built for this nation that we cannot afford. I didn't understand that. My identity was Jamaican first, and I didn't understand what it meant to be Black. Right? And we don't talk about the shadism and colorism that exists in Jamaica. That is very real. That comes from our history and legacy of slavery. We still have sovereignty. So the Queen, we're still asking for reparations, and they're saying, what's that? Right? And so there are these ways that there wasn't space for me to really have the conversation. And so I wrestled, and that went into a place of me being a young organizer, and real angry. I was ready to burn some things down and tear some things up. Until I had to recognize that I would be burning my people up as a part of that same structure and system, right? That people became these systems that I was fighting against, and I needed to change that, right? And so one of the reasons why I'm talking about myself is I think it has led me to this work of restorative justice. It's not just about me serving my community and many communities, but about me being filled up and feeling whole too. Right? That anytime I have the privilege of being in a space with other people, there's a way that I'm replenished. I am made new again. I'm cleansed again. It's like water washing me again. And I really appreciate that. And so I want to share two stories with you. And some of the people in the room might be here that I experienced this with. I reached about two different calls. I recently went on a pilgrimage with the Living Legacy Project pilgrimage. And I've been in Oakland, California for about 3 years now. My organization is predominantly Black. There's only one white person that's on staff, and recently just got a fellow that is also a white woman. And so my space had really shifted to this place where I didn't feel like there were ways that I had to show up that was inauthentic. I was just chilling. I was just me, right? And so I go on this pilgrimage trying to translate all of these things and shine the light no matter where I go and what. And I was really challenged being in a space with a lot of white folks that wanted this transformative experience but didn't want to do anything with it, in my opinion. That we can see the great side of James Chaney, and we can listen to stories of folks that were connected to Jimmy Lee Jackson, and we can talk about all of it. Well, what are you doing when you leave this space? I require you to do something when you leave this pilgrimage. And it's an incredible pilgrimage, but that's not what they were asking people to do. They have their different ways of doing it, but that's not how I wanted to do it, right? And so my way of doing that was basically engaging in these conversations with folks, but also asking questions that I knew would challenge people, right? But it was also challenging me, where I was once again in this space of teaching white people. And the one night I got real angry, and one of my elders said, "Jodie, you gotta go." You know, she was holding on to me, and I was like, "No, I'm ready," you know? But I was moving from such a place of anger that wasn't healthy for me, because this person could not get it, because they had not lived my experiences, and nor would they ever, right? And so it was doing more pain to me, because I'm still rambling and mad, and he just chilling and eating his food. And I'm in the hall like, I'm waiting for you, right? But that wasn't doing anything for me. That was not healthy, and I needed to begin to really recognize that. And so later in the trip, we went to the Dexter Parsonage, one of the first places that MLK lived and preached as a part of the Dexter Memorial Baptist Church. And we were at this parsonage, which was also the place where Coretta was home with the children, where there was this bomb that was thrown through the window. And I was not paying attention, if I'm being honest. I was just staring at this woman, incredible woman, Dr. Cherry. If you ever have a chance to go to the parsonage, you have to meet Dr. Cherry. Incredible, makes eye contact with you like no one else. You just feel her connecting with you. You are with her in a crowd of people, in a sea of people. And so I'm just looking at her feet and disengaged. Lord knows what I was thinking about. There was just silence in the air. And she calls my name. And I was like, ooh. Just because I was that lost. And she said, Jodie, you gotta come up here. And so every year when folks go to the parsonage, they give someone a key to open the door. And so she calls me up. Without me knowing, this was not probably nice, you're not gonna get cute for the pictures or anything, I was just angry. So she calls me up and she is making eye contact with me. Deep eye contact. And she is just naming all the ways that people in my life that I knew and those that have come before, 7 generations before and so much further back, created this moment for me to be there. And I didn't know what to do. My knees were giving out. I even had to take my shoes off up here because every time I just get so filled up, my knees start shaking, right? And I didn't know what to do in that moment. I was like, me? She was like, yes, you, right? And that was a call that I received. Not just about the work that I'm supposed to do in the world, but the ways that I need to humble myself. Like I needed to really humble myself because I didn't know any better or more than these white folks that I was sharing space with just because I was a black woman that had experienced so many forms of violence and oppression within this world. And it was just checking myself, and it just felt like I was in this moment with her, and I was like, darn. And if I'm keeping it real, I also had some criticisms of MLK that I was grappling and wrestling with in a way that we often uplift him, that we don't allow ourselves to see him as human. And to recognize the doubts that existed. And that frustrated me because I felt like the path we were creating for young organizers was unrealistic. That it didn't name the risk of violence, of harm, of death. It created this easy slate to organizing, and then it became trendy, where you could wear a Black Lives Matter shirt and suddenly you were doing the work. And that's not to criticize folks, well, I'm critiquing a little bit, but yes, you can wear that shirt, but what else are you doing? How are you speaking to folks about an intersectional platform that this country has named as terrorism and violence when they can't see us as intersectional beings, right? And so I really just needed to humble myself, to listen to the words and the legacy of MLK, and to recognize that they didn't fear just a man, but the way that this man could love. They were afraid of how deep he could love. That was beyond race, that was beyond gender, that was beyond sexuality. That made them afraid. And it allowed me to ask the question, how deep is my love? How deep is my love for people that don't look like me, and the people that look like me that make me mad sometimes, right? And I feel like they're just not getting it, right? And so I just continue to go back to that moment, and synchronicity. I was recently in Selma with the Selma Center for Truth, Nonviolence, and Reconciliation, and there was an unveiling of a historical marker by EJI of 2 men that were lynched. And I had just finished speaking about the process of mourning and what it means to mourn, and we don't get to do it enough. And lo and behold, I looked through the crowd, and Dr. Charity was standing there. Wow. And my coworker, I was like, I'm gonna fall out, hold me. You know, but just these moments, these constant calls and reminders of go forth, go forth. I'm tapping your shoulders, go forth. Right? You know where you need to be going, and I'm still having trouble in terms of leaning into that because I know the risk that it requires. And that same risk is what we need to translate to our young people. When we think about mobilizing and sustaining our young people, we need to see them as just that, people. Right? A huge part of the civil rights movement was because of the power of young people that the nation began to really listen. Right? And so as we continue to reflect on our past, I guess this brings me to the second story. Following these notes, that's great. Bring me to the second story. As I came into the town, I had a driver, and we were talking, and I was talking about the work that I do at Arjoy. Another part of it is that I coordinate our truth-telling, racial healing, and reparations work. For us to highlight the different local and grassroots initiatives happening around truth-telling so that we can make them visible. So that we don't feel alone, but also we move away from a capitalistic, extractive relationship that we have with each other. So it's not just about the taking of the resources from our earth and from our economy, but we do that same thing with each other. You know, we go places, we give out business cards so that we can get further, whether we want to believe it or not. So moving our work away from this extractive relationship to where we are in deep community, right? Where I'm not allowing burnout to happen because I want to take from you to elevate who I am, right? And to be clear, I think that our Jodie could have suddenly written this manifesto or a black page and said, this is what truth and reconciliation would look like for the United States, and people would follow. I honestly believe that, but that is not how we operate as an organization or as people that serve and support that organization. And so we decided that we need to be in community with each other. We actually met in 2016 at Richmond Hill in Richmond, Virginia, because we realized we needed to do that on sacred ground. The planning needs to start on sacred ground so that we could be true and authentic and be led, right? And so we did that kind of visioning to kind of highlight and map and make visible these different kind of truth-telling related initiatives that were happening. And so documenting over 170 different initiatives that are happening. There's so much more that we don't know about. So if you know some, just let me know. We'll elevate them. We'll highlight them, right? And so to go back to this conversation with my driver, we were talking, and I was really talking about reconciling and dealing with the past. And then he reminded me that we must also acknowledge the present. That there's a way that sometimes we talk so much about what happened in the past that we can't see what's happening today. Nor do we take those lessons from the past forth with us, right? And I think one of those is to be able to highlight the power of our young people and to center the voices of our young people. It's not enough to have one or two young people at the table. That doesn't mean you're doing intergenerational, youth-centered work. Are they leading a process, and are they getting paid for it, right? Because we're living in a system of deep poverty, right? And we need to be able to provide money for our young people to think about economic dignity. Not just justice, but we need to think about dignity, right? And so a huge part of our work at the organization, anytime we have young people serve, we are paying them for their work. And sometimes they get to name a price. You know, they can go a little off, but we want to hear you. We want to create space for that, right? And not just for you to say that it falls on deaf ears, but to create a process where we're in community and we're in relationship with each other, right? But one of the biggest things is not to see our young people as disposable, right? And so when I go into juvenile hall and Camp Sweeney, which is our longer term facility for young men, I see them as people. I'm not afraid of you. I know where you come from. You probably won't worry about me like, who is she? This is my home. This is my place. This is my stomping ground, right? And so for me, that's also part of humbling myself. I'm not coming here to give you all these resources and say, this is what you need to do not to get back in. This is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. And sometimes that happens within restorative justice, that we're doing to people and not with people.
Right.
You can sit in a circle and still do to people and not with people. Right. You can still do that and not center the voices of young people. Right? You can still use a circle to suspend and expel somebody, but also shame them, but not acknowledge the very school system that has done violence and harm to them, right? That they can't function and focus in your classrooms because of the poverty that exists within community, because somebody just walked over a dead body this morning, because somebody saw their mama get beat this morning, because someone was sexually harmed last night. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about the very violence that the system has done to our young people for them to engage in what we see as violent behavior. Right? And so when you're asking young people about violence, who has shown them another way? We, and I say we have not shown them another way. Right? So there are ways that we have made them disposable. That you say, we've tried, we've given you too many chances. But did you support them in that? When you lock a young person up and you throw them behind bars and you put them in isolation, and then you have their parents paying for calls, they did not put their child there, and they sure as hell did not work that hard so their child can end up there, right? So we need to begin to hold these systems accountable. And a true restorative justice is one that is with an anti-racist, anti-bias lens, that looks at our multiple systems and structures of oppression so that we are undoing, so that we are decolonizing. Restorative justice as we know it is colonized in this country, very much so. The circle process as we know it is colonized in this country. So how do we continue to decolonize these processes? It also means to decolonize our minds. Every time we sit in circle, we don't worry about time. We're going to do this check-in in this opening because we want to get to know you and we want to get to love on you. Before we get to whatever business is we're supposed to talk about. We can talk about the harm, but we will not shame you as a human being for that act in which you have committed, because you are not the worst thing that you've ever done, right? And we need to stop making people disposable, right? And so two of the ways that we've seen restorative justice be so remarkable, restorative justice that some of you might not even know about exist in that way, is particularly Rwanda and Sierra Leone. And so after the genocide and the international courts were really thinking about the different ways that they could hold folks accountable, right? The community was like, we don't want that. We're looking for truth-telling and reconciliation. And these courts were not listening to them. And Rwandese people decided that they were going to get together under a tree and sit in a circle, gacaca, in Kinyarwanda, right? They decided to sit together because they wanted to reconcile. They wanted to hold folks accountable, but the way to do that was reconcile. That I'm going to live with you in community. I'm not just going to have you out of sight, out of mind. I want to live and be with you in community, right? That is deep. We're talking about deep trauma, deep harm and violence. Family members that committed atrocities against each other, deciding that they want to sit in circle and talk. And we can't do that in this country. That's something, right? And the same thing when we think about Sierra Leone, family talk, right? Decided to do the same thing after the Civil War. This has been done before. We are talking about a remembering of things that we've already known, right? And so when we talk about restoring, we're talking about restoring our relationships with each other as human beings. And we talk about racism, something that's embedded in our DNA, and people ask, what do we need to restore if we didn't have relationships before? There's something wrong if you think that we weren't connected before someone decided that they wanted to call us black and white. There's something wrong with that notion, right? And to name that, restorative justice, so the way that we restore ourselves today is a part of letting go. That any world I want to create, what it means to be Jamaican, will look so different. And while it's sweet now, there's some pieces that I need to let go of. Because there's a certain privilege and power that gives me, quite honestly, right? And so the world I'm looking to create and the restoration I'm asking for requires me to let go of that. Requires me to surrender, right? Relinquish that power and to simply be in community with others, right? And to continue to center the voices of our young people who we have made disposable at the hands of the system. We put them out there and said, these young people are doing the work. Let them do the work. We praise them, we clap for them, right? We need to create meals for them. We need to create spaces for them to go to and retreat and to just breathe and be. We need to talk about mental health and violence and harm. We need to talk about the ways that anger become internalized racism and oppression. We need to talk about all of those. When we talk about sustaining, it's about growing and thriving. Nourishment for our bodies, but as well as our souls. And so a part of my work, when I think about those that will be standing on my shoulders, is to continue to pour into them just as much as they've poured into me, if not more. Because sometimes there's nothing left for people to pour out, right? And if I got a little something, let me give you a few drops. And that's just enough, right? Yeah. And so I'm going to say this one last story and then wrap up. I'm not sure what the time is.
You could.
Okay, cool. Let me drink this water real quick. And so I received this orchid plant that was in my house for a while now. I think like 9, 10 months, 11, it could be, who knows. And I received it as a gift from someone. Actually, they just didn't want to have to take care of it, if I'm being honest. So I had this orchid in my house for a while, and I had been watering it. I like orchids, but to be honest, I don't think I really know how to take care of them. And for some reason, I didn't Google it. I still can. And so this orchid was in my house, and it was dying. The leaves, there were no more petals on it, no more flowers. It looked dead to me. And there were 2 leaves recently, about a week ago, that just looked really brown. And I had this thought of throwing it away. And I said, no, let me put 2 more ice cubes in here. And so as I'm putting 2 ice cubes in the orchid, I see these bugs on one of the stems, right? And I was like, whoa, I could have thrown this thing away that was bearing all of this beauty, and I was not recognizing it because I was only paying attention to what was dead. Or what I believe to be dead, right? And if we know anything, everything sheds a layer, right? And so this orchid was just shedding layers to make for something new, right? We see our young people as dead. We see trans folks as dead. We see people that are not within the pews as dead, right? So many things around us we see as dead, when what they're doing is shedding a layer to make themselves new again. And what they need is some nourishment. What that orchid needed from me was 2 ice cubes and not a bucket of water because I was drowning it, quite honestly, right? And so we need to think deeply about our relationships and to change our frame and to change our lens. That everything that we believe is dead, including ourselves, we are making new. that we need to shed these layers, any layer that is covering all of whatever this is, to make ourselves new. But we also need to be patient, right? That time isn't real on some level. Time isn't real, right? And so we need to create space for things to come alive. If I had thrown that orchid away, I would have never even noticed that these buds were growing, right? And so it's the same thing with our community, that we need to continue to nurture our community and to stop seeing things and people as dead. That there is enough suffering, but abundance is real and it exists. The world in which we have that has so much suffering, someone thought of this. And so we can think of something else. That our dreaming should not be limited by time, should not be limited by our oppression, definitely should not be limited by this president. Because we know what is possible, right? And we've seen it before. Someone thought of us. My mother thought of all the things that I could be, and I'm sure I probably surpassed her expectations. She's like, what is my child? I'm like, don't worry, just tell people social justice, right? So I really want to leave you, if anything, out of everything that I said, I'm not sure I talked much about restorative justice, and that's okay, to just really think about shifting our frame and asking yourself, what layers are you shedding? And ask the same thing of those that you're serving in community. And the more that we begin to ask those questions, the more space and time we create for people to grow and for them to be transformed, not in our time, but in their time. Thank you.
We'd like to take the next 15 minutes or so for Q&A. If anybody has any questions for Jodie.
It's okay if you don't have questions.
Thank you so much for presenting. I'm wondering, is there a practice that you can share that you all participate in that others might be able to learn from?
Yeah, definitely. So the kind of primary way, so is there a practice, thank you. Is there a practice that we can share so others folks can engage in it? I was right?
Yeah.
So to do restorative justice, often it's the circle process, which on some level is very simple, and you all have probably done it before in different parts of your community, where you're just kind of sitting in a circle and sharing with each other. There are different kind of circles. Some of the work we do is with harm circles. So when a kind of deep harm has happened, or there's a fight between a few folks or miscommunication, but also using circles to celebrate. So if someone has graduated, we might ask an essential question and go around the circle. Some of the important things in the circle process is asking things like values, because we assume that we have the same value because we're in the same space, and that's just not true, and often becomes problematic when we see a breakdown in communication. And so we're asking folks to say what their values are, but also their agreements, the way that we want to navigate through the space together. There's a little book of circle process, which is written by Howard Zare, which some white folks call the grandfather of restorative justice. He is incredible, but that's one text. And then there's a book, Returning to the Teachings by Rupert Ross, that has spent a lot of time within Native and Indigenous communities. And then there's another writing on Redfoot pedagogy that talks about the Native and Indigenous practices of restorative justice. And you can also find information on restorative justice on the Randi's genocide, the Chacha website that has a bunch of resources as well to talk about the cultural practices of restorative justice. Was that helpful?
You're absolutely awesome. Thank you. Representing us like this. I wonder how, you may have spoken to it, but it wasn't clear to me. I wonder how the whole concept of restorative justice, and how can we bridge that gap and redirect that even into the families. We see so much happening in our schools, and I'm talking about the elementary, 4th, 5th, 6th graders, and when you peel back, you discover that there's a missing link in the family, and no one, and I know there's a lot of work on this, but the way and the pain that kids process because of the absence is devastating, and is creating havoc in the community and so on. So the question is, how do you re-engage the family?
Thank you. I think one of the things for practitioners is to have a trauma-informed lens. So when things are showing up in circle and in space, you're able to recognize it. So, you know, people's avoidance, the aggression that it comes from somewhere, and they're not just like an angry young black boy, right? So I think having a trauma-informed lens is one. And anytime restorative justice is happening in schools, I think you need to do parent circles. There are a few people that do parent circles, particularly within the elementary schools, but I think we need to be doing it in all of the schools, but also using restorative justice in community. And so one of the places is in Chicago. They have a restorative justice hubs model. It's along the $1 Million Block. So the blocks that contribute most to the prison industrial complex, often through black and brown bodies. And so we are starting to replicate that model in Oakland around being safe outside the system. So folks are dealing with community conflict and harm instead of calling the police. We know and believe within indigenous and native traditions and practices that we don't own restorative justice. And so we need to be able to be in community with folks that can continue to teach each other, that can continue to deepen their practice. And so I think those are some of the ways. So if you know that a mom, you know, just lost their child, you can circle up. Like, let's do it. You know, if you know that a family's having some issues, we can circle up. And it's possible because folks are having the relationships with each other. So not just when deep harm happens, but just to be and sit in space. And so we've done circles where folks are just sitting and talking. Someone's like, you have a question? Nope. What do you want to talk about? Right? Just, it's really about being. And so those are some of the things, the practical things I would suggest. And also within your ministries, I would suggest the same thing. Right? Especially when you're doing stuff from a place of liberation theology, really sitting and allowing folks to discern in community so that they can learn from each other. And you can also hold what is difficult and what you know to be true.
I have a question. I'm willing to talk about this with you afterwards because it probably could be longer. Is one thing that stood out for me, what you said is we need to have everlasting relationships with our young people. And so one thing that, I'm a youth practitioner in Minnesota, and so we have a lot of nonprofits and we have like a lot of different grants that people go after, but it's like the young people are disposable after they're off caseloads or after they're done with them. And I feel like I've been fighting against the beast saying, it don't stop after 13 weeks, y'all. That's why they keep cycling back through. So how would you suggest going about that to make people realize, like the big head honchos, organize, you know what I mean, the organizations, that everlasting relationships are important? I know that's long, sorry.
It's okay. This answer, I hope you like it. Ask for forgiveness later. Do it and ask for forgiveness later. That when you begin to show others what's possible, they then want to do it. One of the things I think is also creating a space that young people want to come back to. So even organizations that might work from a kind of case manager standpoint, like are there spaces in the organization that's just a youth room? Right, that's kind of designed by the young people who are coming through the space, that they can come and kick it, they can come and do homework, they can come and receive resources, so that they know that it isn't just about management, but also about community and relationships. So that's one of the tangible things I would really suggest in terms of creating a space that young people want to come back to. Because so one of the things that happened, I'm just going to name this, at Oakland is like a transition center, right, that young people go through out of juvenile hall. Right? And we've been talking lately about the language of like transition, that's not youth accessible, so they don't understand what that means. So that might not be a space that they want to go to, or if they've gone there, they don't remember it. Right? And so just thinking about the language that you're using when you're engaging with young people, but also the space that you're creating. Because the more you create a space that feels like home, despite the case management you're doing, young people will come back and want to keep coming back to it. But also some of those folks you're working with, you probably are going to ask them, like, what's your why? They may have forgotten it. Why are you doing this? Why are you here? Because you get stuck in the work so much, you're like, I'm just going to move through the motions. I'm just going to move through the moments. You know, and so they might also need a reminder of why they're doing this work. And also recognize, like, maybe this is not what they should be doing. So they might need to recognize that. So, you know, just trust that you can create that space and ask for forgiveness later. You're welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
So I have two questions. The first one is, do you happen to know Dee Cooney?
I don't.
Okay, I think she does a little bit in Oakland also, but that was a stretch. My second question is, my congregation is in Nellis County, which is in Florida, and for the last couple of years, we have joined in an interfaith group to bring restorative justice to the schools. Because Florida is one of those states where they will arrest a 5-year-old. And they do. And they put them in cuffs for having a tantrum. It's ridiculous. And then, of course, they get a record. So we have been working very hard to get the school system to move in this direction. And there is movement. So, but what they are telling us now is, well, we are doing part of it. So I understand that there are different levels of this, bringing this to schools and training schools in this. And so I think they've done like the first level and they're like, oh, we're doing it. And we're like, no, you're not. What you've done is trained one person per school, which is not enough. So I'm wondering if you've struggled with bringing it to institutions fully, so that they're not just doing a little piece of it and claiming that they're doing restorative justice, but really the whole complexity of your program. And if you could give, maybe you have some tips about how you break into and then expand it once you get into an institution like that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely, most places that actually receive restorative justice training don't do it on a whole systems level. So what that means is community building circles where young people in their advisories or at different breaks in their schedule is sitting and just building relationships. And then harm and conflict circles when there's a fight, miscommunication, altercation between young people, elders, anyone in the school community. There's a circle process as well. And one of the critical pieces is welcome and reentry circle. So the expectation that when youth have been suspended, expelled, or incarcerated for a period of time, when they come back in, there is a welcome circle and a reentry circle to ask what do they need. Also to acknowledge what they missed because they were out for a certain period of time, and to get to the root of what is happening. And so those are the 3 different levels. Most places just want to do the community building because they think that will solve everything, that if we build community, somehow the conflict is going to go away, or we don't have to engage in it. But also places are giving a lot of money for doing restorative justice these days. And so we've definitely struggled with a lot of places trying to implement restorative justice. One of the places in Madera, California that I think has done some great work, this gentleman came to one of our trainings, fell in love, and then went back and started, he just asked his teachers, like, who wants to do this? And he had some great teachers because they were like, I do. And so he got all these people together, he trained them, and then they started doing restorative justice for their students. And without a conflict and harm circle training, he already started doing conflict and harm circles. And then he's an administrator, so he has a little bit more power than the teachers in that setting. So think about who the key people are within the schools and thinking about how they can support, but also are there key community members that are connected to the school that have the capacity to do it. In Oakland, it was a little bit different because we had the Office of Civil Rights that came in that was looking at the disproportionate rates of expulsion and suspension, and so something needed to be done. And initially, they were trying to have the teachers kind of do conflict and harm circles, and they recognized that's just not feasible. And so everyone in the school is trained, from janitorial to cafeteria, everyone. One of the beauties of it right now is that you also have peer restorative justice teams. So think about your young people as key people to be able to deal with conflict and harm. And there's a risk that comes along with that. A lot of principals sometimes are like, I'm not down with this. But one, it allows for young people that come from probably different communities to build relationships with each other, to recognize that conflict is normal, to be violence interrupters, but also creates pathways to employment for our young people. That there is no degree that they need to say, I'm doing restorative justice, and now there are master's programs that are created for it, right? And so those are some of the things I would suggest, thinking about your young people as key people, the key administrators, looking at key community members, but also just because it's only a community building circle doesn't mean it's not restorative. That we need to see restorative justice as flexible and expansive. And that there is a real challenge for a lot of people who are in these educational institutions to implement restorative justice. So do what you can, and also be creative with that. Is that helpful? I hope so.
Yeah.
Jodie, my name is Evelyn Parker. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'd like for you to expand a little bit on that and perhaps give some examples of young people who are actually in the process or have been shaping policies whether they're working through city councils or even working through congregations and denominations to shape policies that have some work that's relevant to restorative justice?
Yeah, definitely. So particularly within Oakland, we have been meeting with different board of supervisors. My organization and some of our youth have been meeting with different board of supervisors for about 1.5 years to do a presentation to the Public Safety Committee on restorative justice and the need for it. There is a diversion program that exists, one of the only diversion programs that exists that way in the US, which is pre-charge. So you go through the program, you make your plan collectively, come to a consensus, and then it's not a part of your record. Because initially you were never charged. Most places you're charged, then you go through this restorative justice process. And so young people are a huge part of that. And continue to share their stories so that folks could recognize that this diversion program needed to be funded and it needed to continue working. And so it works with the district attorney's office as well, with some place, and they have a deep relationship with the DA's office, which works out really well. So they do work in Oakland and San Francisco. Young people's voices are a huge part of that. And especially young people who have had a generation of parents and family members who have been incarcerated. And so the next thing is this Public Safety Committee presentation that we got forward. And we're also framing it as a public health issue. And we're going to have young people that are going to be speaking about the importance of restorative justice. Most recently, young men from Camp Sweeney had the opportunity to introduce policy about healing and more restorative ways that they can engage with young people who are incarcerated in this longer-term placement facility. Because sometimes there's excessive force as well as confinement. That if we think about mental health, increases the chances of depression, suicidal ideation, a lot of things that the juvenile institution officers don't have the trainings and skills in, right? So another thing, I guess this is another example, is that there was this report recently that we're still working on to look at Camp Sweeney, the longer-term placement facility, and juvenile hall. And it looked like they were comparing them, although I don't think that's what they intended to do, it just looked that way. And it really showed that juvenile hall didn't have any standards in place for kind of juvenile institution officers. Juvenile institution officers didn't engage in any programming. They didn't have adequate training. There was just a lot of missing pieces. And so through that, there's going to be now implementation of policy for deep and extensive training, but also gives us an opportunity to go to juvenile hall and teach restorative justice classes with young people. And so even throughout the district, when it comes to restorative justice in schools, young people are paving the way and elevating their voices. And we're also building this along with sanctuary cities, right? And so when we think about restorative cities, we're also talking about sanctuaries. And so a lot of young people that have been engaged in the sanctuary cities movement are also engaged in restorative justice and speaking truth to power at these district board meetings, at county meetings, board of supervisor meetings. And so that's also a huge part of our lens, especially right now because the budget is under attack. And we know that folks don't see restorative justice coordinators, on one hand, as necessary, as essential. And so young people are saying, like, what do we need to do to support our coordinators? And so there are all those places that young people are influencing, informing policy. And Oakland is also just unique because of kind of culture around organizing and the way that this process needed to be implemented because they were breaking some laws. Yeah, was that helpful?
One more question?
Thank you for your presentation. I work in the homeless services space, and you know, the result of injustice is very apparent. And I was just wondering if you had any models or any resources within that space in terms of restorative justice with folks who are experiencing homelessness.
I haven't particularly done that work, but I have some people that I might be able to connect you with. A lot of it is about holding space, and so we do that in community now. One of the events we did was a Restorative Justice Day celebration, so it was open and outside, and folks got to sit in a circle. And it was unbelievable how deep people shared when we were out in the open in public in this park, as opposed to when we are behind closed doors, they might be more reluctant, but people just started going there about all the things they were experiencing in their life. And if we know statistically around folks who've been experiencing homelessness have also been system involved and various mental health issues as well, right? So a part of that is our framing as practitioners, not to see issues as isolated, but to look at the historical legacy of those issues. And it's the same thing with restorative justice. And so there are a few folks actually in Harrisonburg, Virginia, I'm not sure if it's from Virginia, it's okay if you're not. A few folks that work at the Mine Shaft that's located close to Eastern Mennonite University's campus that are restorative justice practitioners and peace builders that I think might also be able to support you. And there are different models of circle process that folks have used, and it's very much linked to a lot of social work therapeutic models as well for those of you who are social workers.
Thank you. Thank you so much for welcoming. Jody's going to be around for the duration if you want to talk to her more, but now we're taking a 15-minute break. Oh, wait a minute, hold on.
Hi. So yes, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to move into our next session with Nikki Finch.